Afghanistan, where the number of American ground troops continues to grow, the government of Hamid Karzai has resurrected the once ill-fated idea of a pipeline across Afghanistan from Central Asian oil fields and gas fields.
Peter Dale Scott has written extensively about hidden agendas in U.S. foreign policy.
There are people in the administration who believe out and out that this is the American century, that it is the time for American hegemony. Both Republicans and Democrats have said we shouldn't worry so much about what our allies think. It's, I think, pretty clear now to everybody that America has a oil geostrategy in that part of the world.
The U.S. National Energy Policy Report demanded a priority on easing U.S. access to Persian Gulf oil supplies.
America needs to control the world oil system. And the fact that we have put U.S. troops in Georgia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, even in Kyrgyzstan, 200 miles from the West Chinese border, all those troops there are nominally in the name of fighting the terrorists, but in reality, they have established an American presence in the great oil basin of the Caspian, and people more and more admitting that America is a serious player in that area now because of the troops we put in.
But the U.S. continued to push for alternative pipelines out of the area. The most audacious idea was announced to great fanfare in 1995 by the dictator of Turkmenistan, Sapomurad Niyazov. It was the back door to Central Asian gas fields, crossing war-torn Afghanistan to Pakistan and eventually India.
The idea was in 1995 when it was first mooted by Unocal, the American oil company, that the Taliban in southern Afghanistan would act like a security force for the building and the construction and looking after such a pipeline.
Pakistani author Ahmed Rashid closely followed the pipeline's development.
The State Department's diplomats were constantly touring the region and were backing the Unocal project.
The pipeline proposal picked up momentum when the Taliban took control of Kabul and much of the country. Unocal began to woo the Taliban. One of their consultants on the pipeline was a former Pentagon official, Zalmay Khalilzad. In 1996, he wrote, "The Taliban does not practice the anti-U.S. style of fundamentalism. We should use as a positive incentive the benefits that will accrue to Afghanistan from construction of oil and gas pipelines," end quote. He was there in late 1997 when Unocal brought a high-level Taliban delegation to Houston. They visited the suburban home of a Unocal executive.
They were given money to do shopping, they were given medical treatment.
The Taliban delegation was taken to the Houston Zoo, the Johnson Space Center, and the swanky downtown shopping mall. The delegation then went to the State Department in Washington. During those same years, though, throughout the 1990s, some key relationships were developing that would take on a whole new level of importance after George W. Bush was elected president. When Chevron signed its first big deal with Kazakhstan, a commitment to invest $20 billion over the next 40 years, Condoleezza Rice was on the Chevron board. Chevron even named a new oil tanker after her. Kazakhstan's foreign minister acknowledges that those personal ties remain critical to his country's continuing close cooperation with the United States.
We used to have very close relationship with all the old members of the U.S. Republican administration, and I believe that this kind of the relationship is being continued nowadays.
Old interests, new possibilities.
September 11th and the extraordinary events, the tragic events of September 11th did create a new reality. As with every event, there are opportunities that arise from it.
Indeed, it may well be that Washington has already begun to take advantage of those opportunities.
Well, freedom, justice and a world rid of terrorism are just some of the stated aims for Operation Enduring Freedom. But is there another reason for bombing Afghanistan? With worldwide demand for oil increasing and some of the Gulf states looking very vulnerable, the U.S. is desperate to tap the oil fields of Kazakhstan and other central states. And as ITN's economic correspondent Lian Halligan now explains, Afghanistan is key when it comes to moving that oil to the West.
The September the 11th atrocities sparked a coalition, a crusade, said George Bush, for freedom and justice. But take a closer look. There's an important subtext to the struggle over Afghanistan: oil. Over the last few years, you may have read that the West, and particularly the US, is becoming less oil dependent. But it's just not true. Back in the 70s, the US used 16 million barrels every day. Today, that's ballooned to 22 million, making America by far the world's biggest oil importer. The European Union used 12 million barrels a day 30 years ago, but now it's 15 million. And oil's not just used for petrol for cars. Right now, you're watching a television made of plastic, presumably in a well-warmed room, and probably wearing man-made fibres. And all thanks to oil. So where does it all come from? Saudi Arabia, of course, is the biggest exporter, over 7 million barrels every day. Iran, Iraq and Kuwait are big players too. But don't forget the former Soviet Union, which exports almost 4.5 million barrels daily. Apart from Russia, it's these newly independent Central Asian states, particularly Kazakhstan, that are key. Already 20 billion barrels of oil reserves have been found in Kazakhstan, and there could be much more. The oil and gas so far discovered in these parts is worth $3 trillion in today's prices. That's why Western money men are so interested in getting this oil to world markets.
This war was coming for a long time. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, but who also worked in intelligence roles for Presidents Reagan and Bush 1, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He wrote a book in 1997 called The Grand Chessboard: American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. And in 3 specific places in that book, he says the key to America's control of the world in the 21st century is the control of Eurasia.
In support of his thesis, Brzezinski states, "A power that dominates Eurasia would control 2 of the world's 3 most advanced and economically productive regions, and about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources."
And then he says that without an attack on the order of Pearl Harbor, or without a direct external threat, there was no way that the American people would support the imperial mobilization necessary to control Central Asia. And in this book, again, written in 1997, Brzezinski had a map of where the next world conflict was going to be. And you look at this map in the book, and it's exactly where we're fighting now.
Thompson looked deeper into Pakistan. His timeline showed Osama bin Laden was reportedly last seen in Pakistan after escaping from Tora Bora.
CBS News has exclusive information tonight.
But thanks to an in-depth investigation by CBS, he also learned bin Laden was in Pakistan on the eve of 9/11.
Bin Laden was spirited into this military hospital in Rawalpindi for kidney dialysis treatment. The military had him surrounded, says this hospital employee who also wanted his identity masked. They were saying that Osama bin Laden had to be watched carefully and looked after.
The Taliban are widely alleged to be the creation of Pakistan's military intelligence, the ISI.
There's really no difference between an ISI training camp for terrorism and an al-Qaeda training camp for terrorism. You would have some people working for al-Qaeda, and they would go out to an al-Qaeda mission, and you had other people working for the ISI, and they would go off to Kashmir on one of their missions.